We don't usually notice silence at a funeral. It's expected. But this one lingered longer than it should have, settling in after the last car door closed. After the last polite nod, it felt unfinished, like something had been postponed rather than ended. This is how she remembers it. I didn't stay for the reception. I stood near the edge of the cemetery until the workers began folding chairs, then walked back to my car without looking over my shoulder. Arthur Langford had hated drawn-out goodbyes. He used to say they turned grief into theater. Madeline didn't leave early. She stood by the path in a black coat that probably cost more than my monthly rent when I was starting out. Her hands folded, her posture flawless. When she saw me, she smiled the way people do when they want to be seen being kind. "You should come back with us," she said. "Everyone's gathering at the house in Lake Oswego. I need to get back to Seattle tonight." I told her, "Work." Her smile tightened. "Work can wait. Family shouldn't." I nodded once. Arthur understood when work mattered. That landed. I saw it in her eyes before she looked away. "I'll call you," she said. "We should talk soon. There are things we'll need to sort out." "Of course," I said. "When you're ready." She hesitated, like she wanted to add something sharper, then thought better of it. "Drive safe." I watched her walk back toward the others, already surrounded again. She was never alone unless she chose to be. We noticed how carefully she chose that moment. The drive north blurred. By the time I reached my apartment, the sky was dark and my phone was buzzing with missed messages from clients who hadn't known Arthur died that morning. I answered what I could, ignored the rest, and sat on the edge of my bed with my shoes still on. Arthur's voice kept looping in my head. "People show you who they are when there's nothing left to gain." At the time, I thought he was talking about business. 2 weeks passed the way polite grief does. No raised voices, no accusations. Just emails with careful wording and pauses where warmth should have been. Then the message came. "Eleanor," Madeline wrote, "we should meet with Thomas Whitaker. There are questions about certain decisions Arthur made toward the end. It's best to clear them up professionally." I stared at the screen until the words stopped feeling abstract. "I'll be there," I typed back. Another quiet line appeared beneath her name. "Good," she wrote. "I think this will be clarifying." That was the first time I understood that whatever Arthur had left behind wasn't just money. It was a test. By the time 2 weeks had passed, the quiet had learned how to pretend. My days went back to shape. Client calls, site visits, red lines on drawings that refused to line up the way they should. I told myself that was normal, that grief didn't always announce itself. Madeline's messages arrived in a careful rhythm, not daily, not urgent, just enough to stay present. "Hope you're holding up." Arthur would have wanted things handled cleanly. "Let me know when you're free." Each one ended with a soft landing. No demands, no accusations. It made them harder to ignore. At the office, my assistant slid a folder across the table and paused. "You okay today?" "I'm fine," I told her. "Just tired." She nodded. "Didn't push." People learn when not to ask. The invitation came on a Tuesday afternoon, buried between a contractor update and a zoning notice. An email from Thomas Whitaker's office. Short. Professional. Madeline had already confirmed. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. Then I forwarded it to my calendar and closed my laptop. That night, I called Madeline. It rang twice. "I was wondering when you'd reach out." She said, calm, almost warm. "Thomas's email." I said, "You want to meet in person. I think it's better that way. Fewer misunderstandings." "About what?" A pause. Just long enough to feel intentional. "About the trust," she said, "and the choices Arthur made near the end." I leaned back against the counter, the phone warm in my hand. Those choices were his. I'm not saying otherwise. Her voice softened. But when someone's health declines, things get complicated. You understand that. "I understand, Arthur," I said. That hasn't changed. Another pause. Then a light laugh, like she was trying to smooth the air. Let's just talk, she said. No assumptions. No tension. Seattle, I replied. Tomorrow. Perfect, she said. I'll see you there. After we hung up, I stood in the kitchen and listened to the refrigerator hum. It was the only sound in the room. I didn't feel afraid. Not exactly. But I felt something shift, like a door closing behind me without a sound. Whitaker's office didn't look like a place where families fell apart. Soft chairs, neutral walls, a table polished enough to reflect the tension in everyone's hands. Madeline arrived first, looking every bit the grieving heiress in a tailored wool coat. She stood when I walked in, leaning in for a brief, perfumed hug that didn't quite land. I'm glad you came. Eleanor, she said, her voice a practiced silk. I didn't want this to feel adversarial. I didn't either. I replied, setting my architectural satchel on the mahogany. Thomas Whitaker entered a moment later, flanked by two men in dark, identical suits. I didn't recognize them, but the way they scanned the room, not for faces, but for exits and weaknesses, told me everything. Ms. Hayes, the older man began, folding his hands. I'm Marcus Thorne. We represent Ms. Pierce. We believe there are grounds to challenge the validity of the Langford Heritage Trust. I looked at Madeline. She was staring at a point just past my shoulder. Whitaker's voice stayed level. You're alleging undue influence. Thorne. That's a heavy lift for a trust established 3 years ago. We're alleging a pattern, Thorne corrected. He slid a document across the table, a log of my visits to Arthur's Lake Oswego home. Ms. Hayes, our records show you visited Mr. Langford 4 times a week in his final 6 months. During that same period, Ms. Pierce's scheduled visits were redirected or canceled by staff on at least a dozen occasions. We believe you acted as a gatekeeper, exploiting Mr. Langford's fluctuating health to poison his view of his biological kin. The words landed heavy, not loud, but exact. They weren't just calling me a thief, they were calling me a manipulator who had locked a dying man in a room. I was there because he asked me to review the Lisbon blueprints. I said, my throat tightening. Arthur was fully capable. He was sharp until the last week. A man in declining health is susceptible to those he relies on for professional validation. The second attorney added, you positioned yourself as his only intellectual peer, isolating him from the emotional support of his granddaughter to secure control of $30 million in international assets. Madeline finally looked up. Her expression was a mask of controlled, almost apologetic regret. It's not personal, Eleanor. But when I saw the bank records, when I realized I was being kept away while you were signing papers, I needed clarity. Whitaker closed his folder with a sharp thud. Arthur underwent 3 independent capacity evaluations. He retained his own counsel. He chose this path because he didn't want his life's work liquidated for social standing. Thorne smiled thinly. That will be for the Washington state courts to weigh. If you proceed, Whitaker reminded them, the no contest clause in the domestic will triggers immediately. Any heir who challenges the Heritage Trust forfeits their claim to the Seattle and Lake Oswego properties. That's nearly $4 million. Madeline, are you sure your clarity is worth that risk? Madeline flinched, her fingers tightening around her designer purse. For a second, a flicker of doubt crossed her face, the first crack in the mask. She looked at Thorne, then back to me. I just don't understand why he trusted you with everything, she whispered. I wasn't everything, I said, leaning forward until I saw my own reflection in the table. I was consistent. I showed up for the work, not the wealth. If you file this, you aren't just fighting me. You're fighting the man you claim to love. Thorne stood, cutting the air. We'll be filing in King County within 48 hours. As they gathered their papers, Madeline lingered. This didn't have to go this way. I picked up my bag, feeling the weight of the firm I'd built with my own hands. It still doesn't. But once you sign that filing, Madeline, the door Arthur left open for you locks forever. She opened her mouth, then closed it. We both noticed she didn't say wait. Outside, the Seattle air was thin and cold. This was no longer about money. It was about whether the truth of a legacy could survive the rot of an accusation. I met Thomas Whitaker the next morning. Same office, same table, different air. He waited until I sat before speaking. "I want to walk through this carefully," he said. "Not as a warning, as preparation. Go ahead." He slid a single page toward me. Arthur established the Irrevocable Living Trust 3 years before his death. He did it here, in Seattle. Separate counsel. Independent medical reviews. "The works, I know," I said. "He told me." Whitaker nodded. "He also named you trustee." "That matters." I leaned back, letting that land again. Trustee. Not owner, not operator. Guardian. In the way Arthur meant it. Madeline's filing will argue influence. Whitaker continued. "They'll look at timing, proximity, communication patterns. They'll suggest isolation." "He wasn't isolated," I said. "He was tired." "I agree," Whitaker said evenly. "But courts don't move on agreement. They move on records." I watched his pen tap once against the page. A habit. Controlled. The trust holds assets valued at approximately $29.4 million. He said, "Commercial property in London. An adaptive reuse residential project in Lisbon. Income-producing holdings in Toronto. Day-to-day management is handled by firms on the ground. Your role is strategic approval, oversight, vision. That's how Arthur wanted it." "Yes," Whitaker said, "and that's why this holds." I exhaled slowly. "What about costs?" He didn't hesitate. "The trust can defend itself. As trustee, you can authorize that." "I won't," I said. He looked up. "Eleanor, I won't use the trust to protect myself." I said, "Not from this. I'll cover my own defense." "That's not required." "I know." I folded my hands. "It's necessary." Whitaker studied me for a moment. "You understand that litigation of this scale isn't cheap." "I understand." I said, "My firm is profitable. I'll manage." He nodded once. "That choice will matter." Silence followed. Not uncomfortable. Considered. He broke it gently. Arthur anticipated this. He included a no-contest clause in the will governing the domestic estate. "I remember. If Madeline proceeds," Whitaker said, "she risks forfeiting her inheritance in Lake Oswego." I didn't respond right away. Arthur's voice rose in my head. Steady as ever. People don't need saving from their decisions. "I won't threaten her with that," I said. "You don't have to," Whitaker replied. "The document speaks for itself." I stood, picked up my bag. Then we let it. Whitaker rose as well. "We'll respond to the filing when it comes." At the door, he added, "Arthur chose you because you see systems, not just outcomes." I paused. "He chose me because I listen." Outside, the city moved the way it always did. Traffic, footsteps, coffee cups clinking somewhere nearby. I walked to my car and called my office. "Clear my schedule for the week," I said, "and tell accounting I'll be pulling from retained earnings." There was a brief pause on the other end. Then, understood. I ended the call and sat there for a moment, hands on the wheel, feeling the weight settle into something solid. Arthur didn't leave me money. He left me responsibility. The courtroom in Seattle was smaller than I expected. No grand staircase, no echoing marble. Just the low hum of an air conditioner and the soft, rhythmic shuffle of legal pads. Madeline sat 2 rows ahead of me. She didn't turn around. Her hair was pinned in a tight, severe chignon, the look of a woman who wanted to appear victimized but remained impeccably composed. Beside me, Thomas Whitaker squared his shoulders. "Remember," he whispered. "This isn't a theater. It's a ledger. Stay inside the facts." The judge, a woman with silver hair and eyes that looked like they had seen every possible variation of family greed, gestured toward the front. "Ms. Hayes, please take the stand." I walked to the witness box. The wood felt cold under my palms. After the oath, Madeline's lead counsel, Marcus Thorne, approached me. He didn't rush. He wanted the silence to feel heavy. "Ms. Hayes," Thorne began, "you are an architect. You deal in blueprints, structures, and long-term planning. Is that correct?" "It is." "And you applied that same planning to your relationship with Arthur Langford, positioning yourself as his sole intellectual peer while his health declined." "I visited my grandfather to discuss the Lisbon project," I said, my voice steady. "We spoke about adaptive reuse, not inheritance. He found comfort in the future of his buildings when his own future was shortening." Thorne leaned in, resting a hand on the rail. "Our records show that in the month the Heritage Trust was finalized, you were at his Lake Oswego home 12 times. Ms. Pierce, his granddaughter by blood, was turned away 3 times by staff, citing his fatigue. Did you suggest he was too tired for her, but just sharp enough for you?" "I never directed his staff," I replied, looking directly at Madeline. "Arthur chose his company based on the quality of the conversation. He didn't want a bedside vigil. He wanted a board meeting. I gave him what he asked for. And in exchange, he gave you control of a $30 million international portfolio." Thorne smiled thinly at the judge. "A convenient trade." "I am the trustee, Mr. Thorne," I corrected. "I don't own the assets. I steward them. I receive a standard fiduciary fee, nothing more. My benefit is the responsibility of ensuring those buildings don't crumble under the weight of someone else's impulsive spending." Whitaker stood. "Your Honor, we have already submitted the independent medical certifications and the affidavit from the separate counsel Arthur retained. The process was insulated from Ms. Hayes's influence by design." The judge reviewed the stack of documents, the letter of wishes, the capacity evaluations, the clear recorded intent. She looked at Madeline, then back at me. Thorne tried one last push. "Even with capacity, influence can be subtle. Your Honor, it's the whisper in the ear of a lonely man. Subtlety is not a legal standard." "Mr. Thorne," the judge said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "Suspicion is not evidence. The court finds that Mr. Langford took extraordinary steps to ensure his intent was documented and independent." She closed the file with a definitive thud. "The petition to invalidate the trust is dismissed." The silence that followed was brittle. I stepped down from the stand, my legs feeling like lead, but my heart beating in a slow, certain rhythm. As we gathered our things, Madeline intercepted me in the aisle. Her composure was cracking, a frantic energy vibrating behind her eyes. "This isn't over, Eleanor. That was just a local ruling." "The court has spoken." "Madeline," I said quietly. "One court," she hissed, her voice low enough only for me to hear. "We'll see how your vision holds up in London when I freeze the accounts." I looked at her. Really looked at her and saw the exhaustion she was trying to hide. "You've already triggered the no contest clause here. You're fighting for a ghost of a fortune now." She brushed past me, her designer bag hitting my arm. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't say stop. She just walked toward the exit, heading straight for the second gamble that would eventually break her. The notice arrived 3 days after the Seattle ruling. It wasn't a court summons. It was a terse, 3-paragraph letter from Thomas Whitaker's office. "The condition has been met." It began. I was already halfway to his office when Madeline called. She skipped the greeting. "Did you know?" she demanded, her voice vibrating with a panic she couldn't mask. "Did you know he put a kill switch in the will? Arthur didn't use terms like that," I said, pulling into the garage. "He called it a clarity clause. It was disclosed to you 3 years ago. You let me walk into that courtroom knowing it would wipe out the Lake Oswego estate. I didn't stop you, Madeline, because I couldn't, I said steadily. You chose to believe your lawyers were smarter than Arthur's legacy. Inside the office, Whitaker didn't sit. He tapped a specific paragraph in the domestic will. The no contest clause is absolute. By filing the petition to invalidate the trust, Ms. Pierce triggered the immediate forfeiture of her entire interest in the domestic assets. The $3.8 million the house, the portfolio, the liquid accounts, it's gone. Madeline's voice cut in through the speakerphone, sharp and thin. That is a technicality. I was protecting my rights. Arthur anticipated that if you didn't respect his judgment, you wouldn't respect his gift. Whitaker replied, the assets now revert to the residual charitable allocation. It's no longer your inheritance. Madeline, it's a donation to the architecture fund. The line went silent. I imagined her realizing the bridge loans she had taken to fund this lawsuit were now unsecured. Without the inheritance as collateral, the banks would move by morning. This is the point where most people stop, Whitaker said after she hung up. I shook my head. She won't. She'll gamble on London next. Then she'll learn that Arthur didn't write a trap. Whitaker said, closing the file. He wrote an exit. She just refused to take it. London felt heavier than Seattle. Not louder, just denser, like every step carried a record. I sat at the end of the table while Madeline's new counsel arranged papers with sharp, efficient movements, different firm, different accents, same confidence she'd worn into every room so far. This application seeks interim relief. Her barrister began, voice clipped and calm. Specifically, a temporary freeze on trust distributions pending review. Across the table, Thomas Whitaker's counterpart in London adjusted his glasses. The trust is governed by Washington state law. Jurisdiction does not lie here. The assets do, the barrister replied. Commercial holdings within this country fall under local authority. I felt Madeline shift beside me. She didn't look at me. She stared straight ahead, jaw set, like momentum alone might carry her through. The judge listened without interruption. A pen moved, stopped, moved again. Whitaker's colleague spoke next. Arthur Langford transferred legal ownership of these assets into an irrevocable living trust 3 years prior to his death. Control remained administrative only. Beneficial ownership did not. The judge nodded slightly. And the letter of wishes. It was placed on the table, not dramatized, not read aloud in full, just acknowledged. Madeline leaned forward. That letter explains intent, not legality. It explains capacity and motive. The judge replied, which is relevant. Her barrister tried again. There is a pattern of reliance. Reliance is not coercion, the judge said, and suspicion is not proof. The room settled into stillness. After a brief recess, the decision came quickly. The application is denied. The judge said, costs to be paid by the applicant. Madeline's breath left her all at once. Her barrister bent close, whispered urgently. She shook her head. Outside the room, her phone started ringing before we reached the corridor. She glanced at the screen, then ignored it. Then it rang again. I stopped walking. You don't have to do this. She turned on me. Do what? Stop. Keep pushing. Her laugh came out thin. You think I can afford not to? Whitaker's colleague joined us. Ms. Pierce, the costs order is significant. How significant? He answered evenly. More than you've already spent. She looked past him, past me. I'll appeal. There are similar risks in Toronto and Lisbon, he said. You should reconsider. I didn't fly here to reconsider. The phone rang again. This time she answered. Yes, she said. Then quieter. No, not yet. A pause. I said, not yet. She ended the call and pressed the phone into her palm like it might bruise. That was my lender. She said, they want assurances. I didn't respond. There wasn't anything left that wouldn't sound like pressure or pity. Whitaker's colleague spoke gently. At this stage, further filings may compound exposure. Madeline's shoulders sagged just enough to notice. Arthur did this. He planned for resistance, I said. Not ruin. She looked at me then. Really looked. For the first time since Seattle, the anger wasn't sharp. It was tired. You could stop it, she said. I can't, I replied. And I won't. She turned away without another word and walked down the corridor alone. We noticed how the space around her widened as she went. London hadn't taken anything from her. It had simply stopped protecting her from the weight of her own decisions. A year passed without ceremony. Work filled the hollows where the legal noise used to live. I approved budgets, declined shortcuts, and pushed timelines when the craftsmanship didn't meet Arthur's standards. My life had become a series of strategic approvals, exactly as he intended. The message from Madeline arrived on a Tuesday morning. It was short, stripped of its usual curated grace. I'm in Lisbon. I need to talk. Just once. We met in a quiet cafe overlooking the Tagus River. Madeline looked different, not unrecognizable, but the polish had been replaced by a weary sharpness. Her designer coat was gone, replaced by a simple, worn trench. The lenders called the final notes last month, she said, her voice hollow. After the London costs order and the failure of the Toronto injunction, they liquidated my personal holdings, my apartment, the investments, everything. I'm not just broke, Eleanor. I'm leveraged into a hole I can't climb out of. I watched the steam rise from my coffee. You gambled on a narrative that didn't exist. Madeline, I thought momentum would protect me, she admitted, staring into her cup. I thought if I fought hard enough, Arthur would eventually concede from the grave. I finally read the letter of wishes in its entirety. He knew exactly what I'd do, didn't he? He knew your nature, I said. That's why he established the support trust. He didn't want you destroyed, but he refused to let you lead. She looked up, a flicker of something not hope, but survival in her eyes. Whitaker said there are conditions. He said you hold the keys. It's a framework, not a gift, I replied, sliding a folder across the table. Basic living support, no lump sums, no access to capital. It requires 1 full year of community housing redevelopment work and the completion of a certified real estate management program. No exceptions for travel or social obligations. She scanned the document, her fingers trembling slightly. And after the year, I will consider you for a junior project coordinator role in our Lisbon office. Entry level. You'll answer to an associate architect. You will have no authority over the trust's assets. You'll just be part of the system, rather than trying to own it. Madeline swallowed hard. The silence stretched until the river outside seemed to go still. You'd let me work, she whispered. Arthur's legacy isn't money, I said, standing up. It's choice. I'm giving you yours. If you show up tomorrow at 8 a.m., the support starts. If you don't, the door locks for good. She didn't hesitate. She nodded, her hand closing over the folder with a grip that finally felt grounded. I'll be there, she said. I left her there, sitting in the fading light. As I walked back to the office, I realized that for the first time, we weren't fighting over a ghost. We were finally just two people living with the consequences of who we chose to be. The office in Lisbon was quiet by the time the last call ended. I closed my laptop and sat there longer than necessary, hands resting on the desk, listening to the building settle. Somewhere down the hall, someone laughed. A door closed. Ordinary sounds. The kind that don't ask anything from you. Madeline had been working in the annex for 3 months by then. Junior project coordinator. That was the title. It came with spreadsheets, site visits, and long afternoons chasing permits that never arrived on time. No shortcuts, no special treatment. She stopped by my office once a week, always on schedule, always prepared. That afternoon, she knocked lightly and waited. I finished the community housing report, she said, placing the folder down. They approved the next phase. I flipped through it. Clean work, careful notes, no rushing. Good, I said. You caught the zoning issue early. She nodded. I learned the hard way what happens when you don't. Silence followed, comfortable, new. I'm still not sure I deserve this, she said after a moment. I'm not sure that matters. I replied. You're doing it anyway. She smiled then. Small, real. When she left, I stood by the window and watched the river cut through the city. Arthur used to say cities told the truth slowly. You had to stay long enough to hear it. I thought about the trust, about the numbers that once felt heavy and now just felt precise, about the courtrooms and the letters and the way my name sounded when it was spoken under oath. None of that followed me home anymore. What stayed was quieter. I slept better. I worked without bracing myself. I stopped explaining my decisions in advance, stopped rehearsing defenses that no one asked for. I didn't feel victorious. I felt aligned. Arthur trusted me because I build things that last, not because I fight harder, not because I win louder, because I know when to hold, and when to let weight sit where it belongs. That changed how I moved through my days, how I signed my name, how I spoke when I didn't need to persuade anyone. I'm Eleanor Hayes, an architect, a trustee, a person who learned that protecting a legacy doesn't mean carrying it alone. Some stories don't end with applause. They end with steadier hands. And if this one stayed with you longer than expected, you know where to find the rest.